Well, I was 18 years old when I landed in Beirut, and I always say it was the best of times and the worst of times. As an artist, I found total freedom to be able to do anything and everything I wanted to do, because there was a sense of lawlessness, and somehow the chaos of a post-war country is a kind of enabler and set a very good platform for jumping into ideas and experiences. So a lot of my work is derived from personal experiences, and I felt that the more I lived Beirut, the more I engaged with the city, the more art I was creating. And at that time, the art I was doing was very reactionary. So it was always reacting to the story of Beirut, to the post-war, to the chaos. And at that time, being a young woman, what the main topic or theme of my work was my identity, my sexuality, coming of age in a country where that had just come out of darkness. I was in the prime of my life, being young and also very open and open-minded and open to the world and creative and connected. So a lot of the work I was doing in the beginning was, you could call it kind of feminist, but it was about claiming my space in my city, claiming my body in my city, because my body was being aggressed on many levels, physically, emotionally. I inherited a city with so much trauma, and it didn't ask me if I wanted, it just dumped it on me and my body absorbed it. And so a lot of the work in the beginning was about coming to terms with that. And so I used my body to make a lot of work, using the body as a tool.
Were there spaces to have a collective discussion about that among young women? Or was it just a personal...
Yeah, well, at that time, it was more personal, but eventually we kind of met each other, people who were working on creative works. Somehow the universe has a way of bringing you together. But personally, I felt very alone because it was a new country. I had difficulty with the language, I had difficulty with the culture. And then at that age too, it's not easy to talk about things like aggression and violence and the way you were being treated by men and by women. I had not yet developed the vocabulary to express the pain that I was feeling from the city, that I was absorbing from the city. There was signs of destruction everywhere. So when I landed, downtown Beirut was still bullet-riddled, and it was only after a few years that they tore it down and they started rebuilding. But even that tearing down was a kind of violence too. Again, something that was happening beyond my consent, this erasing of memory, and that in itself was a form of violence. I wanted those buildings, I wanted to learn about my history and my city, but it was being erased faster than I could learn about what had been going on.
And how was moving from between the city and what was outside the city? I remember feeling a kind of a cognitive dissonance between what I was experiencing downtown Beirut, in Hamra, and then Ras Beirut, and what was happening in the villages.
Yeah. I was very much in the city. I fell in love with Beirut. It was really like love at first sight, crazy love affair, and I had no desire to explore any other parts of Lebanon. And to be honest, at that time, the south of Lebanon was still occupied by the Israeli army. We still had Syrian occupation also. And being alone, I had moved to Lebanon alone without my family. So I felt a sense of danger also, that I didn't feel comfortable moving outside the city as a single young woman.
Why you decided to move back to Beirut?
I didn't decide, it called me. I could have gone anywhere in the world. I grew up abroad, I was studying abroad.
Where did you grow up?
In Nigeria. And then I did 3 years of high school in the UK. And I remember everyone was applying for college to schools in the States, and in Europe, in the UK, Australia. And I wrote down Lebanon, and I hated going. We used to go in the summers to visit family, and I hated it. But it's just, I always say it was a divine calling. Now, in retrospect, I understand that it couldn't have happened any other way. I'm supposed to be there. I'm supposed to be doing the work that I'm doing there.
And you enrolled at UB?
Yes.
In the College of Arts?
At the time, I went in as a freshman, and then I was already studying art in high school, and I wanted to continue that, but there was no fine arts program at the AUB at the time, and the closest thing was a graphic design program. So I went into that, but that was the worst decision I ever made in my life, because design is very different from art. And while my soul felt this deep sense and need to express and engage with the city and create works that reflected on the city and the nature of the universe, at school I was being forced to create products for clients. And so there was a big clash, with my identity. But that, design is a great foundation for anything, but on a personal level, it taught me to kind of learn how to navigate through the chaos of everything, even what was going down in AB, and really, stick to the calling that I had to come in and be an artist and create. And so despite everything, at the end I was able to give a voice to the song in my heart, through the artwork.
You talk about art as a process of healing.
Yeah.
In your healing and reconstructing memory.
Yeah.
I found interesting what you were saying before about memory. You were talking about the possibility of building a positive memory, a memory which doesn't hurt anymore. Do you really think that's possible?
Yeah, I think that's possible, but I think that we have to evolve as a human species. I believe that we are born out of love, and our natural condition is love. But our environments affect, I don't want to blame it on the environment, because we are the environment too. Sorry. But as a species, we are in evolution, and we will continue to evolve. We've been evolving over billions of years, and there's still many years ahead of us. And if our biggest mistake is to put ourselves in the here and now and believe that this is it, the end all be all. But we have immense history behind us, and hopefully a beautiful, history coming up into the future, if we can behave and treat our planet with a bit more kindness. But we are in that process, and I've seen it happen. If you look at the conditions in Lebanon today, we're not where we were 5 years ago. We are in a better place. I truly believe that. I've seen that happen. But it works very slowly, and it will take time.
If you compare the generation of the 90s, the ones who were in their 20s in the 90s, and the young artists who are today in their 20s, how what do you see?
Very different. Very different. Very different. Because we were surrounded by so much violence and so much aggression, and the rebuilding of the city was happening so quickly that you could barely breathe, and there was this need to hang on to the city and preserve so that future generations would not repeat the same mistake. There was a need to hang on in order to process and understand what happened, so we could find, internal peace within. There was a sense of fighting on so many levels, fighting not just like for life, but to be an artist. Back then, if you said art, if you said I'm an artist, this is a joke I always make. There is no real word for artist in Arabic, in Lebanese Arabic. You say artiste, or you'd say I draw or I paint. But the word artist, basically means a prostitute. It means a showgirl.
Okay.
So I had trouble explaining to people, that I was an artiste who did not flash her boobs around, unless it was for art, but that's a whole other thing.
Absolutely.
But So it was hard to even, there were no galleries, there was no spaces to show your work. So back then I was very, I took a lot of inspiration from the Fluxus movement, and I treated Beirut, in that respect, that it was a game that I could play with Beirut, and I could turn anything and everything into art. And so my whole life became, everything always was in the process of making and creating and interacting. And so the city was my canvas. And so I would do pieces on paper and leave them in taxis. Or I would make little posters and stick them on the streets. Till today, there are no rules. You can do anything you want. But I find that the newer generation, they were born with the internet. So it's not just in Lebanon, but it's an international situation right now. Imagine from the moment you were born, you have access to an infinite amount of information. What does that do to things like curiosity or longing? This sense of longing of the spirit to discover and to grow. When everything is instant gratification, it's a different process, it's a different way of creating. I'm happy for them. I'm happy that they are, they have accessibility to galleries to exhibit, to museums to be inspired. There are workshops and lectures, and people come from all around the world, and so they're very cosmopolitan and very informed. But there's this sense of, what's the word? Ambivalence. Because when you have everything, then where do you go from there? But that's probably what's starting this movement now of people looking within for answers. That when the external world no longer satisfies your creative needs, then you start to go inwards, which I think is a beautiful thing, because that eventually is what will do the work to take us to a higher level of consciousness.
I remember in the 90s there was a generation of writers. They were mostly writers across the Arab world in their 30s who were claiming the choice of intimism as opposed to the choice of the literature engagée of the 70s. It seems that today, look at the way you talk about looking inside is quite different. It seems a political way of looking inside, not a choice of disengagement. Am I right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's empowering. It's a new way, because also, who can you trust today? What can you trust? The information on the internet, and that's what we all rely on. I think that you trust your personal experiences, and the journey of going inwards is purely experiential. And I was saying earlier that I believe that you're born with everything you need to know. It's just a journey of moving in. So that means learning to quiet the mind, learning to sit with yourself, learning to push away exterior things. And that's very empowering, because then you no longer power capitalism. You no longer give your time and attention to things that are irrelevant.
Who are the artists who most inspired your work when you were studying or?
Yeah, I think so in the 90s there was a lot of connection with the Fluxus movement and George Maciunas. But I think all my life I connected a lot to women artists like Frida Kahlo, Ana Mendita, who connected to their body and kind of feminist, spiritual feminist ideologies, and experiences. Yeah. I'm a cliche.
No, not at all. Is there... Let me ask the last question to conclude. Wait a moment. Oh my God. It's very rich.
I think musicians inspired me more than artists, to be honest, in the 90s. So I grew up listening to heavy metal music, and that was like my passion. And so, being in Nigeria, I would get like smuggled cassettes, of like Iron Maiden and Metallica, and that I found was able to already fuel, because I had this sense of anger when I was younger, because growing up in Nigeria, being exposed to so much extreme poverty and inequality made me feel very anxious when I was very young. So at a very early age, I felt this need to fight for those who could not speak for themselves. And so metal was a way for me to release my anger and voice, my anger. And so that was, I always say I moved from rage to grace, because I started with metal and then I moved into spirituality, but it was music that took me through that process, because even it was through music that I discovered spirituality, and now I practice a kind of sound-based meditation. So has been more inspiring to me than visual art.
When was your first exhibition?
2003, Lagos, Nigeria.
In Lagos,
Yeah.
so not in Beirut?
No,
Why not Beirut?
I was living in New York at the time, and I purposefully decided that my first big solo show should pay homage to the country that raised me. So I chose Nigeria.
And what was it about?
It was called Of Love and War. So it was about my relationship with militiamen. The 90s in Lebanon, I was dealing a lot with, like I said before, like my body and reclaiming my body, and questioning why men go into war, why they pick up guns. And so a lot of, like, the subject matter of a lot of my work was this kind of uber toxic masculinity, and poking fun at macho militiamen. So I would take images of them and purposefully dress them down to subdue them. So I would dress them in glitter and feather and boas, and turn an object of violence into something very docile through a very kind of feminist approach.
And how was it received?
Good. Good.
In Lagos?
Yeah.
Not in Beirut.
I mean, it was glittery, so people like glitter. And I think, the community that came to the show was very mixed. We have a big Lebanese expats in Nigeria, so a lot of them came, and it was unusual for someone to come and do an exhibition. I wasn't living there anymore at the time, so I brought all my stuff, big paintings, and yeah, it was wonderful.
And what came after that?
After that, then so I was living in New York for 4 years, and I felt like that was not my life mission. So every time I try to leave Lebanon, it pulls me back. So after that show, I realized I need to move back to Lebanon and keep making work and being there. It felt a bit strange that I'm living in New York, I'm making this work about militiamen, I'm exhibiting in Nigeria. There was like an identity crisis. So honestly, I got bored with New York. Like, I didn't feel like I belonged there, and I didn't want to be another New York artist. There was, again, that divine calling to go and be in Lebanon and be of service to Lebanon and participate in the rebuilding and the restructuring of my country. I mean, even now, 2019, we're still rebuilding. There is no sense of national identity, and artists and creative people are becoming more involved in government and taking stronger positions in civic society.
Maybe it's not a bad thing. There is no sense of national identity.
Yeah. I'm not into nationalism. Definitely not. And I think that in Lebanon, we have something very special, and we're still learning how to use this gift. It's not easy living in a place where you don't have this national structure, but it does, as you're saying, that requires check this box. Are you this? Are you this? Are you that? But we're complete rebels in Lebanon. We don't belong to anything. We're making things up as we go along. But that pure creative spirit is just incredible. And so I'm optimistic that if we just learn how to navigate that a little better, we can create something really beautiful. And Lebanon is the center of the world. It's at the crossroads of the universe even. There's an energy there that's incredible. To have 7,000 years of continuously inhabited cities. You know, there's something really strong there. And as we develop as a human species, we will learn how to channel and use our energy and our presence better. You know, as we learn to cultivate awareness and reconnect to land and you know.